So 4.6, solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Goal, solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So ways to solve quadratic equations. The first way we talked about was we used order of operations. We use order of operations, opposite and backwards. That was when b equaled 0, so there was no middle term.
So is that one for b equals 0?
Yep, number 1. So these are just 4 different ways to solve quadratic equations. Step 2, or sorry, the second way, factor, yep, and use the, yes, zero product property. Today's lesson is on, yes, complete the square.
I see what you did there.
And tomorrow's lesson will be about quadratic formula. So here are some steps. Okay, we're going to go through these steps and some examples in a second, but we're going to write them out first. Set the equation equal to 0 in blank form. Yep, standard form. So keep in mind that standard form looks like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Step 2. Isolate the value of c. So c is going to be all by itself. Step 3, make the coefficient of a equal to 1 by dividing by the value of a on both sides, unless a is already equal to 1. Step 4. Factor the a coefficient from both x terms. Step 5, divide the term, this is extra, divide the x term by 2. Good.
So like cross out the term factor?
Yes. Step 6, square the value, square that value from step 5 and, yep, add it to both sides. Step 7, factor. Factor the side that is now a, think about this whole phrase together.
Perfect square.
Yep. Yes, trinomial. Eight, take the a blank of both sides. Yep, square root. Remembering to blank or blank the value. Yes, plus or minus. And lastly,
I love the memory.
That poor isolated variable. So these are our steps. Side note, the dividing by 2 and squaring piece, that right there, make a note on the side, that's our b divided by 2 squared that we talked about in the opener. So we'll give it a shot. Number 1, isolate c. So we'll add 3 to both sides. X squared plus 2x. Now this is the something different. We'll add a blank. Okay, we saw in our steps that we're going to add something to both sides. The thing that we'll be adding to both sides is the result of taking the b value. Our b value is 2. Right, we're going to take our b value, divide it by 2, and then square it. So 2 divided by 2 squared. I do this off to the side. Some of you done that, so I can keep the flow of my problem going. So it equals 1 squared, which is 1. So that's the number that I'm going to add to both sides. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides.
So it's not 1x?
Nope, just 1. So then we have just completed step 5, and sorry, step 6. Now we're on step 7, which is factor the side that is now a perfect square trinomial. Hey, this is just like what we had on the board. So this should look familiar to go from this perfect square trinomial to its factored form. Another way to recognize that is this term right here, this b divided by 2, that's always the value that will go there in the factored form.
So why did it turn into x plus 1 squared?
Because that's the factored form of this perfect square trinomial. If you take a look back at this question that we did right here, we were able to see that in reverse. Okay? So the next step then is to square root both sides. That's step 8. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus 2. And then isolate the variable. We can't just subtract 1 from both sides because that's a plus or minus 2. So we're actually going to create 2 equations. Either x plus 1 equals, well, x plus 1 equals 2 and x plus 1 equals negative 2. This is where we subtract 1 from both sides and get x equals 1 and x equals negative 3. A common mistake that people make is to subtract 1 here and say, oh, it's plus or minus 1. If you subtracted 1 from 2, it is 1, but when we subtract 1 from negative 2, it's negative 3. Number 2. Where should I start?
You should
Add
add 8 on both sides.
Add 8 on both sides. Good call. Isolate the c. So we have k squared minus 2k plus blank equals 8.
And you're gonna do b over 2 squared.
Yep. B.
It's 2 over 2 squared.
Careful, it's a negative 2.
negative.
Yep. You're good.
2 over 2 squared, and you get positive 1.
Good. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. We square that, we get a positive 1. So we've got that positive 1. That's what we'll add to both sides again. Now we rewrite in factored form, and again, it goes back to the b divided by 2 term, and that's how we'll know what goes in the parentheses. Because it's a negative, it's going to be minus 1. Now we can square root both sides. K minus 1 equals plus or minus 3. So K minus 1 equals 3. K minus 1 equals negative 3.
Is that a K? K minus 1 right?
Uh-huh.
Alright, didn't that look like
Add 1 to both sides. K equals 4.
oh my gosh.
K equals negative 2.
So are those the actual answers?
Those are the final answers. Those are the spots where this quadratic function would hit the x-axis.
Can we trade now? You take, I'll take you.
Number 3. What should I do first?
Add 12 to both sides.
Good. Subtract 12 from both sides. So y squared plus 8y plus blank equals negative 12.
The 12 or -2.
Ah, close. It's the 8. It's the b value that we divide by 2.
Well,
So 16 then is what we add to both sides. Then we've got this b divided by 2, which was 4. That's what goes inside our parentheses in factored form. And then we square root both sides and get y plus 4 equals plus or minus 2. Then I set up my two equations, so y plus 4 equals 2, y plus 4 equals negative 2. If I solve each one of those, I get, so if I subtract 4 from both sides,
X
on
equals -2.
good, y equals negative 2, and then subtracting 4 on the second equation is going to give me negative 6. Good.